Welcome to the second part. Here I'll show you how to edit your login.php page to connect to the database and also how to check our username and password against that in the database. Now we've already connected to our database. Refreshing this and resending my username and password, we can establish that there have been no errors. I mean this error here. And we have seen that if we don't type data, we will get an error. Now first of all, I'm going to set up a query. If you have used MySQL or any structured query language before, you will know that you can query a database. I think Microsoft Access has this. So here we're going to say select, and in fact we're going to say select star because we need the ID, the username and the password. I don't think we need the ID, but select star anyway. So that will grab all the data. So select star from, and we've called this users, I think. Let me confirm that. Yeah, users. So select star users, and here we'll say where username, which is the name of this here. And we will say where username equals the username that has been typed. Now if that username doesn't exist, we need to display some kind of an error message to say that this user doesn't exist. So what we will do is we will use another function, a MySQL function called MySQL numRows. This counts the number of rows that have been retrieved from the query you've given the database. So we'll say numRows equals MySQL underscore num underscore rows. And in the brackets, we have the name of our query, the variable that I have stored the query function in. And if we echo out the number of rows, I'll just prove to you and test for myself that we should get 1 because we have just one row. Let me click insert and add another row of data. For example, another username and another password. I'll just try that now. I'll be testing this later on. Let's see. Let's say username is Kyle and password is 123 this time. Okay, let's try that. And there we are. Hold on a second. Where am I? There we go. So we have got Alex and Kyle, and we can see the IDs have been automatically incremented. You can see both our passwords here and the 2 usernames. Now we will refresh this and see what we get. Oh, okay. This is the whole part of the check. The reason this has returned 1 is that if I were just selecting every user and then counting the row, the value would increment. Go back here and refresh and we'll get the value of 2 because there are 2 rows. But if I'm saying select where the username equals my username, we're obviously only selecting where my username exists, that is in one row. Usually on a website, you won't have duplicate username. Okay, so now that we have got this, what is the purpose of finding out how many rows there are? Now the purpose is that we can say if num underscore rows is equal to 0, then that means we can, if my num underscore rows doesn't equal 0, then we can execute the code we need to do and that we will need to log in. Otherwise, else we need to echo out, else die. We will give the message that user doesn't exist. So what we're doing is we're checking that a row has been returned where we have supplied that username. And if it doesn't equal 0, we can execute our code to log in. Otherwise, we'll say die and that username doesn't exist. This will be equal 1234 and so on. If it doesn't equal 0, then it must equal something. And if it does equal something, then the code in here will be executed. So if it is equal to 0, that basically means that no result can be returned. I'll resend this. Let's go back. And let's get rid of our echo num underscore rows. Okay, so let's go back to our main page and we'll log in with Alex and ABC. But the password doesn't matter at the moment. Nothing's happened because no errors have been returned. Now let me use Billy for example and type the password in and click on login. That user doesn't exist because no rows that have the user name equal to Billy have been returned. So you can see that that's working. I'll go back to my original thing. So Alex and my password is ABC. Now the code to login. In order to log in, we need to perform a password check. So to grab the password, I'll use a function. Sorry, not a function, I'll use a loop, and that loop will be the while loop. I will type a variable name here. I'll call it row, and that is equal to MySQL. MySQL underscore fetches a row as an array. Okay, so I'll say MySQL underscore fetch underscore ASSOC for short, and this is going to be my query. So I've got my query there. From this we are fetching each column data from here and putting it into an array called row. So obviously with the while loop we'll have our brackets and we'll set some variables. I'll say db username, which is the username that I'll extract from the database, is equal to the row, and that is the row name, the username. So as we can see here, this is the row name here. If this is an array of the data, then each of these are going to be ID, username and password. We're not using 0, 1, 2, but I'm not sure whether that works. Now we'll keep it simple and we'll directly reference the name of our column. So the database username will be row, since this is an array which is using this function on our query. Next we will say db password equals row and then our password. So after this we could echo out, no, in fact we don't need to echo out our contents of our db username and password unless we want to run into errors. We already know what they are. We've seen them in the database. Now what we'll do is we will perform a check. So check to see if they match. It's very simple to do this using an if statement. If our username equals our db username and our password, if our username equals our db username and our password is equal to our db password, then we'll say it's correct. Otherwise, we'll say it's incorrect. I will remove the brackets because there is only one line. So echo incorrect password. Just leave it like that. And here we'll say echo you're in. This. Okay, we'll just test this before I end this part of the video. I'll first say Alex and I'll put a wrong password in. Incorrect password. And now I'll put ABC as password and you're in. So we've checked our username and it exists. We've checked our fields exist. So please enter in your username and password. If we enter in a username and a wrong password, we get an error message, incorrect password. If we enter the correct password, we get you're in. And if we enter a username that is not found, we get an error message saying the user doesn't exist. Okay, so join me in the next part and I'll show you how to create your sessions and your logout page. See you then. This is Ivan Verkey, dubbing for the Spoken Tutorial Project.